Marinkovich, Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education and Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I wanted to welcome you to today's lecture on keeping the energy in 220 relationships. Although higher education seems to be in a period of intense and extensive change, large classes are still an important part of the undergraduate experience. And so any help in making those large classes more effective for those who teach them and for those who are taught is an important and welcome endeavor. And fortunately, we have a great person to address this subject, Professor Tim Bresnahan, the Landau Professor in Technology and the Economy in the Department of Economics and a former chair of economics. Tim received his bachelor's degree in both economics and German, so there were double majors then, at Haverford College in 1975. Went on to Princeton for a master's degree in economics, which he completed in 1978, and then went on to a PhD also at Princeton in economics that he finished just 2 quick years later. Stanford recognized an outstanding young academic when it saw him and brought him to campus as an assistant professor in 1979 before his PhD had even been officially awarded. He has been here since, although he has left 3 times to spend a year as the Marvin Bower Fellow and Visiting Associate Professor at the Graduate School of Business Administration at Harvard, and as a visiting professor at the Institute of Economic Analysis in Barcelona, and finally a year as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General and Chief Economist at the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice. Stanford was lucky enough, however, to have always gotten Tim back here to campus, where he has been a highly productive scholar and highly valued university citizen. His research for the last 2 decades on the technology sector and on technology and economic growth has resulted in almost 90 publications in influential roles with several leading journals, and an appointment as a fellow of both the Econometric Society and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. All along, Tim has maintained an impressive and visible commitment to both teaching and students, a winner of the H&S Dean's Award for Excellence in 1992. He has by now shepherded 30 graduate students to the completion of their PhD, and he very proudly puts updated information about them on his departmental web page. For years, he has also worked with undergraduate students in economics, advising and indeed revitalizing the Stanford Economics Association, the student group in the department, as well as working closely with the Economics Honors Program. In addition, Tim is much sought after for any major university committee or academic administration requiring broad-mindedness, fairness, and thoughtfulness. In other words, anytime
economist traits. Everyone wanted to say it, so I did.
Thank God I didn't have to say it, Tim. In other words, any time where it's important to bring people together who put the university's mission, its faculty, and students at the heart of the matter. Not surprising then that Tim will have thoughts on how to keep a lot of relationships going, whether in the classroom or out. Professor Tim Bresnahan.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. So I'm going to sit down. This is my first trick for you. You want your students to be active. You got to be a little passive, and so I'm gonna sit down. I do have slides. So I've been teaching large lecture classes to beginning economists, beginning public policy students and other types of beginners for over 30 years. I radically changed my practice 10 years ago, or starting 10 years ago when I was our director of undergraduate studies. So I'm going to report to you ideas that come both from experience in the classroom and from the experience of a couple hundred interviews a year, half an hour each, with students coming in to declare the major. And those interviews radicalized me in terms of the problems we face bringing modern students into the university, especially in the departments like mine, when in the early going, a student's going to be sitting in big lecture classes. Those are a necessary evil, big lecture classes. What's hard about it? There's an easy thing about it. There's an easy thing about big lecture classes. You've got a set topic. It's probably the best known stuff in your discipline. You probably know it pretty well. Intellectual success for students in the sense that they learn the material is a challenge, but I don't think it's a terribly difficult challenge, particularly not with modern students who are extremely well trained, extremely goal-oriented, and have a terrific work ethic. I think that part of it, the intellectual success for students part, has gotten easier in the 21st century. What's gotten harder is selling to students successfully the idea that we want them to think actively, that we want them to join a community of people who think using the same ideas or the same tools, and that we want them to be energized and excited about that. That this is not just a way to get 4 years older, not die, and go on to the next phase, which for the young people I meet is often a job in finance or consulting. You know, to energize them enough to join us, to actually think actively, is a harder sell in the 21st century than was earlier. You know, now even though, I mean, the plague of tiger moms has largely passed, but it's still true that students join us with a lot of very specific careerist, over-directed goals, that they love structure past human imagining, or certainly past the imagining of anyone who could want to end up being a scholar and academic. These students want structure. But they, you know, the other thing, we have this huge asset that they're still Stanford students, and you can reach them. I have a bunch of tricks for reaching them and getting them to actually engage and think and take some risks. You need tricks for that, okay? So actually, the one thing I should say right up front, absolutely you should not listen to me at all if you have successful techniques. I'm assuming that everybody that comes to these has something to say in their class, has a body of useful tools and techniques, has a body of knowledge they can usefully think. The second one, if you have a mechanism for convincing modern students that you really want them to learn and use these tools, you should ignore my mechanism. I have one. I've built it up. But if, you know, with Stanford students, you will succeed. If they think you have something to say, and they think you want them to know it. If you're over those two hurdles, everything is good. And it's sort of like it's just convincing them you really want them to know it. That's the tricky bit. Okay, so I'm going to spend some time on the defensive side, how to defend yourself and students' learning from their extremely strong, I'd characterize it as logistical sense of needed structure. You know, what do they think going to university is about? They don't. They're Stanford students. You can talk them out of this, but everyone in their environment has told them it's a step on a path. It hasn't told them you're a place to be, and they care intensely about the structure in the sense of the grading algorithm, the predictability of the workload, the due dates, do I really have to learn this? Do I really have to think hard? And you can talk them out of that, but you need a defensive strategy. My defensive strategy is going to be to accommodate their desire for structure. You know, Michelle mentioned I was in government. I was in government for a while. And so I talked some years later to the lawyer who was, economists work for lawyers in the federal government, that's how it works. I talked to the lawyer who was at the next desk who, you know, I came back to Stanford, I started teaching. I realized we'd gotten these goal-directed, highly structure-loving people. I was kind of surprised. Of course, you know, my colleague who was the managing partner of his law firm got them exactly 7 years after we got them, because all of college-going America now has this structure-loving thing. He got, and so I said, how are you dealing with this structure-loving? He says, oh, it's really easy. Every senior attorney in my firm gets a word macro. This word macro lets you write your weekly rating of every junior or associate in 30 seconds. So every junior associate gets highly structured feedback on how they're doing. They really need this feedback. They love this structured feedback. They get highly structured feedback, very high frequency on how they're doing. And it doesn't actually take any time away from the senior people's work. And so I said, well, wait, does this make the junior people, does this help the junior people become better attorneys? Does this improve mentoring? Does this cause them to learn their job? And he says, Tim, no, you're not listening. They need structure. It has nothing to do with their learning. I was already, it had been 7 years, so I was already radicalized to have to deal with the structure. So I'm going to talk first about how to accommodate the structure, the logistical structure that students want, and then second, how to inject the intellectual structure that we want to take them up. I'm going to draw all my examples from a course which has a little bit of generality. It's the econometrics course. So it's a statistical course, how to use statistics in economics. It's a tools course. And so my goals for students is not that they learn a particular body of tools and techniques. My goals for students are that they learn when those tools work and when they don't, on top of being able to do all the technicalities, that they can learn to criticize an application of the tools if it's wrong, without going overboard, because everything's technically wrong in some sense. That they could ultimately, maybe a couple of years from now, design a really good application of their own, you know, so that not just to have the technicality of the statistics course. So I'm trying to train them to be an intelligent tool user. My first task is to fight off by accommodating their desire for an extremely structured learning environment. So first I'll start, it'll be pretty quick, on how to accommodate their desire for this extremely structured learning environment. And then I'll turn to wiliness in gently inducing them to be active thinkers rather than to just do what I want. It's the first reason why I sit down. Students, think the courses are about what we as instructors want. This is crazy. You know, they got to start thinking, we got to hand the baton to them, and we need tricks for that. Okay, so what's the line here? So first up, so here's 4 boxes. You can see the evil intellectual influence of my year at Harvard Business School. All business school professors love to make 4 boxes. So on the left, we've got this logistical structure, very, very important. Things that are very, very important to students, you know, but I would say, but not particularly important to learning. And so on the right, we got sort of my side. On the left, we got the student side. So, and what's the top and the bottom? On the top, these structured things, this is my accommodationist part. I would say you just absolutely got to overachieve and I'll show an example in a minute. Actually, let me go to that example and come back. So like, here's a typical first page of a lecture for me. And there's lots of other ways you can do it. So first off, I say, what are we going to talk about today? Okay, skip that part. Look at the bolded part. You know, here's what you should have read this week exactly, down to page numbers. Here's the next due date. When are you going to turn in the problem set? in red. The red is, the green is for this lecture. You know, it's going to label the examples I've stolen from my old lecture notes. The red is from the live lecture notes. Problem set 3 is due Friday. Here's what you should be reading. This is me being the accommodationist. You know, in contests, we'll come back to contests. Contests are, this is one of my wily things. You know, students can form teams to earn the right to be a day late on next week's problem set, but they have to work over the weekend. That's a contest. Okay, so all that's very accommodationist on all that. You know, you want to be able to walk out into class the first day when somebody says, what will be on the final? Say, see the syllabus. They want to say, you know, what's the relative weight of the midterm, the problem sets, in the final? You want to be able to say, I have no idea, but it's in the syllabus. All those kind of things, you know, the workload, the due dates, the review, you know, important concepts to know in this course. All those structured things. I think you just got to accommodate it. Now, below the line, this is a slightly radical suggestion, which comes out of my Director of Undergraduate Studies and chair experience. It also comes from my earlier life as a scholar of mass production. In mass production, you know, making the next car is very cheap. Fixing the car that wasn't exactly made right and has to come back for exceptions handling, very expensive. So, you know, 400 students in your classroom, 200 students in your classroom, that's mass production. I strongly recommend, my department has done this, that exceptions handling be taken away from instructors. So, of course, an instructor has to participate in a regrade. Someone says, I wrote down the right answer and I got a lower grade. Of course, the instructor has to participate in that. But we have a policy that the Director of Undergraduate Studies has to also participate in that. You can only ask for a regrade by email. Economics 1 is the one exception because it has its own bureaucracy. But for all courses after Economics 1, if you request a regrade, you do it by email to the Director of Undergraduate Studies, who forwards it to the instructor. I did this when I was first to US, and I'll report to you an amazing thing. If you'd asked faculty how many students come to office hours right after the midterm and want to get a regrade, they'd have said 7,000. I mean, and it turns out that there were like 5 students. There was only 5. There are 4,500 enrollments a year in economics courses at Stanford, and there were only 5 students who were doing this thing where they sort of asked for a regrade every time. And I got to meet them and say, "This is a stupid activity. Stop doing it. It's not going to work out for you." But they were posing this. They were leading faculty to cringe when somebody came to their door with a regrade. So you could take it out of the hands of faculty. And here, I started sending emails back to people who were repeat requesters of regrades. You must be an unlucky person. They keep adding up your scores wrong. And only one wrote back, "Yes, I am a very unlucky person. They keep reading my exams wrong." But most of them just sort of figured out that it was the other things, you don't even need the instructor. Are you going to miss an exam because your team is, competing for Stanford in something? Of course you're going to miss that exam. Director of Undergraduate Studies approves that and tells the instructor, are you going to get an incomplete? Instructor can't, we banned instructors from those negotiations. Are you going to not take the prereqs? Just ban the instructor from participating in it. And sort of why do these things? There's this tiny subset of students that have sort of gone way overboard on this structure, and you can you can free up enormous amounts of instructional time by sort of, I'm sitting in office hours. I know nobody's going to come in and ask me to regrade an exam. That could have only come by writing. So if this opening question, which, this thing which begins, I really didn't understand what was wrong with my answer to question 3. This is now an instructional question. This is now an instructional, so partly you see me above the line being accommodationist. Give them the structure they want. It doesn't do much harm. It isn't very expensive to completely lay out your syllabus at the beginning, and the bottom sort of offering counterstructure. Come on, there's some stuff you don't want to do. And moving it out of the instructor's job and into the director of undergraduate studies job, which has other advantages, like you learn which students are freaking out. Very inefficient to do that at a instructor level because the information is too scattered. But if you got 2 quarters in a row and the same student has wanted to miss midterm exams on many different duty days because a relative died. First off, you might call it, one time it was true. There were 3 people this young lady called grandma, and they had died right around midterm times 3 quarters in a row. So when I call her, it turned out to be a condolence call, but much more frequently, this is a student who's gone over the edge, and the department is well posed to help them out, get them some help. Okay, so anyway, there's the logistical structure. Accommodationist, mostly. Okay, so there was my example. I'm extremely accommodationist about things like this. Very, very structured thing. Okay, so the intellectual structure, how are you going to get them to do active learning? I think this is a hard problem. So I'll start with my method. Oh, wait a minute, how's Alex showing up over here? Okay, so first off, here's my method. And because we're taping this, I picked a time when my method failed. I ask every student to write their name in big, big, thick letters on a piece of paper, and then I have the TAs take their picture. Pretty easy with modern TAs. They got cell phones. They're all, even the guys are now good photographers among your TAs. So here when it didn't work, Alex is flipping his piece of paper, but you can get like much better picture, and he's visually distinct enough that I had no trouble learning his name. So I'll learn 220 names. This is me being an overachiever. I don't think I'm a particularly charismatic lecturer. I don't think I can carry the room. I do think that I can reach out to people and induce them to think by calling their name. So I got, last time I had 220, I got 219 of the names. There was one young lady who I thought was 3 young ladies because her hairstyle changed every day. I never got her name. She was really mad because she'd been a beauty queen just before she'd come to Stanford. It was this man that can't learn my name, and he's learned everybody else's name, but I'll learn them all. So look, there's softer versions of that. The version I used until these 21st century folks showed up was I would pick 5 to 10 people and teach to them. If you pick 5 to 10 faces out of the crowd and teach to them, at least you can get some sort of sense of how it's playing emotionally. But now I've gone to get to know them all. Why do I want to do that? Why do I want to know them? First, I want to change the atmosphere in my classroom. I want, it's when you got 20, it's not hard to challenge people and get them to talk. When you have over 200, it's really hard to challenge people and get them to talk. And to have, taking them to lunch is another thing. That's another softer version of this. You can announce a lunch. Office hours are really bad for this, I think. Really bad way to know people. But something that is different, the hour of lunch with your students in every big class to meet the 15 to 20 that want to come, and then you can teach those 15 to 20 in every big lecture. This is a terrific investment because you'll know, first off, you'll know how what you're doing is playing. And second, you'll have people to call on when you want somebody to say something other than you, which is really, really important to get people to say something other than you. Anyway, that's my method, to try to be a person. There's other things I think you can do that help here a lot. Engineers are good at the next one, which is, pick advanced undergraduate students as at least some of the TAs. Reduce the social distance. There's me. This is another reason not to stand up. There's this enormous social distance between the people who teach and the people who learn. Try to change that a little bit. One of the TAs is somebody that took this course last year and had a lot of fun doing it. You got the social, to go back to my original themes, it's easy to get a large body of knowledge across or tools across to these highly motivated, hard-working students. To get them to feel you really want them to take up these tools and use them, you gotta go a little bit out of the box. Okay, so now let me spend some more time, because that's the first one, know them. Wait a minute, did I had a list? Sometimes I have a list. Oh yeah, know them, challenge them, and liberate them. Okay, so know them, you gotta find some way to know at least 20 of the 220 or the 400 or whatever it is. At a minimum, you need shills for the hard questions. Challenge them, this is gonna be about challenging them to actively think, and then coming back to liberate. So you can make challenges to active thinking pretty much everywhere. We'll look at one in a minute, which is a pause in a lecture. I teach the statistics course for economists and public policy majors and 5 other majors. We're going to test the hypothesis that storks bring babies in a minute. And then you can throw hard questions into problem sets and compel TAs to stop doing technical stuff half an hour before section ends. I visit sections randomly to enforce this law. So first problem set in my course, you do a review problem. You've got a data set that has wages of 2 groups of people, and you're testing the hypothesis that these 2 groups of people earn the same wages. This is a classic problem in statistics, testing the difference between 2 means. And then the last question is, which group do you think came from East Palo Alto? And which group came from Atherton? And this is like a significantly easier question than all the technical stuff they've just done, but a very substantial fraction of Stanford sophomores, almost all men, will say, wait a minute, you didn't teach us that. And that's just a wonderful, wonderful moment in section to say, look, if you can't figure that one out, how are you hoping to succeed in life exactly? These are economists, so they're very curious. Sort of just, stuff you weren't taught. We'll see more stuff you weren't taught in a minute. Stuff you weren't taught is a really good trick. People, very reliable, very reliable. Someone will pop up in class in question time and say, how are we supposed to know that? You say, you're supposed to be a capable working person. So challenges, you can put challenges anywhere. Okay, so here's the storks. This one is a very, very good lecture stopper. We got the red. Okay, you can see so the green up at top is this example. The red is from the lecture. So here's a data set of English towns. And it's a merged data set. It comes from the National Statistics of England. There's 54 towns here. There must be smallish towns. If you look at the babies line, the average one of these towns had 27 babies born in a particular year. They range from 10 to 45 babies born. So these are like mid-sized towns. And then the other data set comes from, only in the UK, right? The Ornithological Amateur Society, which counted stork nests. and multiplied by 2. They always, so there's 1 to 5 stork nests in all of these towns. You know, and here's the software everybody in this course is learning to use. You can bless your lucky stars if you're not, if you don't recognize it. You know, and it's got all of the stuff of statistics, right? I actually took more out. You know, it kicks out all these things. It starts with the means. There's an average of just over 6 storks in each town, an average of just under 28 live births in each town in England. You know, and so then I put it up, and I say, well, let's start with hypothesis testing. We can test the hypothesis. Now, with hypothesis testing, of course, you got to be careful about what the null hypothesis. The hypothesis that storks don't bring babies, which would be a 0 here, that's rejected with enormous confidence. You know, not only can we test the hypothesis, we can measure the, remember these people are economists, we can measure the marginal physical product of storks. Give me another stork and I'll have almost 4 more babies. So it seems that, you know, and then so then we come to, I think, the most important tools of wiliness. I then just shut up. You know, and I, you know, after 3 minutes, I'll say, you know, the reason I got this job, you know, I'm paid by the hour. I'm perfectly happy to sit here until somebody says something intelligent. And then at minute 6, I'll say, you guys do know the correct theory, right? I mean, we deliberately picked an incorrect theory, you know, and then at 8 minutes, I'll say, you know, okay, maybe there's some people that don't know the true theory here. You know, engineering students or something, y'all can ask after class and I'll tell you the true theory. And eventually, even 21st century students, somebody will say, you know, could it be that this is a correlation that's not causal? Good. Good. All right, we're making progress here. That'll be like the bravest person in the class. And then there's an opportunity. Then the floodgates will empty, and I won't let them stop talking until somebody has constructed. It's easy to say this statistical model is false, must be correlation, not causation, when you know the right answer. But in a live example, you don't know the right answer. And so I will push students, once they start talking, okay, tell me why this came out this way. You know, why do we get this correlation? And eventually someone really, really smart will say, probably there are more storks and moms in the bigger towns. And that's why you get this correlation, which is a very, very good answer for a sophomore. But that, you know, so I think it's extremely instructive both to leave the silence out there. It's not like I do this every day, but, you know, a third of lectures, put a bomb like this off, and then, you know, let students take on a problem that's not ridiculously hard. Okay, so there's my first trick. Here's another trick. This is all part of challenges can be everywhere. So remember, these people are sophomores. They've taken another statistics course and they've taken economics 1, both halves probably, not necessarily both halves. They've never read anything about antitrust, so I give them a very advanced paper to read from the research literature as sophomores. And notice question 1, which I think is just a terrific question to answer if you're a sophomore. You know, please make a list of all the tools and techniques used in this paper that I haven't taught you. You know, again, very reliable, always men. Someone will say, wait a minute, this is nuts. Shouldn't you teach us all the tools and techniques first? And I say, no. I mean, you know, half the time when I pick up an applied paper, there's at least one table where I have to Google it. You know, okay, what is that? What did they do in that table? I don't know. You know, and I've been doing this for, you know, since just before your parents were born, for heaven's sake. And you know, and that's way too scary. I think that's way, way too scary. It's very challenging. It's very scary. So there's this long parenthesis in the beginning that says, hey, you know, we recognize that there are a few places where you may not have heard of these techniques, and here's where some of them are. And then the middle, I don't know, dozen and a half questions are just very ordinary questions that take you gently through the process of reading an applied statistics paper in economics. But the other reason to ask him to read this paper by Dennis Carlton and his colleagues is this is the rare market that they've all participated in. You know, this was a conspiracy to restrict financial aid. So, and I'm going to give my TAs very, very firm instructions that they have to spend the last 20 minutes a section on the last two questions. You know, the first one, so this is the back end of the same problem set. You were just a participant in the market for college admissions and financial aid. Do you agree with the paper you just raised? And and then there's the parenthesis gives them a little bit of a clue. Okay, you've got your experience. They've got their statistics. Their statistics come from 20-something years ago when the so-called overlap cartel among the Ivies and MIT was in place. They actually did do it, by the way. The admissions directors got together and from all the Ivies and MITs got together and decided what financial aid to offer each kid that had gotten to them. No one, because they're not-for-profits, no one went to jail, but it did substantially affect and then, so ask students who were in that market. Right? This is a rare market. Most of these guys, they've never had a job. They certainly never rented a house, paid a mortgage. There's a lot of really hard to ask them questions, but you can ask them a question about this, and then, Stanford wasn't a participant in there's a great open-ended question. So partly, in the middle, I didn't show you this, but in the middle of this, we're going to do our heavy lifting. This is a technical course. You got to be able to do the technicalities. I want to tell you, don't just do the technicalities. I want you to act like, someone who could be an intelligent critic, say, of the technicalities from the perspective of your own experience. So that's challenges can be anywhere. Do I have more? Okay, so then the other one, you got to turn them loose. Once even in beginning courses, I think you just got to turn them loose to do stuff. Team projects. One of the things that sophomores in college don't know is that most of adult work is teamwork. So I tell them you can, there are these build a data set contests, find a data set on the web and use the mechanisms of this tool to analyze it. And these contests, I'll end up with one of my contests in a couple of minutes. I'm going to shut up in a couple of minutes too, because everybody but me has been real quiet, which is bad. Then the other thing is let them show off. I'm really strong on this one. Last 15 minutes a week, there's a submit a slide contest. Most interesting paper or press report bearing on this course you saw this week. Already you got the idea. I don't, let's at least read the Chronicle, not just be nose down in the dorm doing the homework. Let's at least read the newspaper. What I'm going to give you 7 of those 15 minutes to put up your slide and explain to your colleagues an analysis. Using the tools of this course of something that happened in the news this week. And this statistics course, very, very empowering. They come in, the first ones come in really quickly with the stuff from health and behavior. You want to know about the difference between correlation and causation. It turns out all kinds of stuff that healthy 50-year-olds do predicts how long you live. Right? It's not causal. You can probably there's probably been 2 of these this week. People who get exercise every day in their 50s will live to their 80s. And I would expect any sophomore to instantly pick up those make great midterm questions in this course. To instantly pick up that a lot of the people who are in their 50s and able to run many times per week aren't beat up too bad yet. And they're, so that's a correlated but not causal theory. And so, but rather than having me do one of those, let's have them find them in a newspaper. Worst analysis using the tools of this course in the Wall Street Journal this week. Best analysis using the tools of this course in the Chronicle this week, and just let them do it. And then the other part, you just got to listen to them. Once I thought about, we don't want to look at Stern. Once I organized this talk by assets, there's your most important asset. Your second most important asset is what you know. That's your second most important asset. There's your most important asset right there. It's your students. If you just liberate them and listen to them, it's going to go fine. Okay, good. So I promised two things: that I would show a contest and that I would shut up. So first I'll show a contest. So this is my most successful contest of all time. I've shown you the data, or at least the beginning of the data. Notice that the variables are named y and x. They're not named by their true names out there in the economy. And of course, the problem in a statistics course is you tend to think about y and x. You don't think about wages and minimum wage laws. So they're just named y and x. And I've shown for convenience, they're in an Excel file for students in coursework, and I've shown you the first, whatever it is, 9 observations for convenience. And then the contest is sort of interesting. You need, the overall rules of contests are you need to have at least 2 colleagues who participate with you, 2 colleagues in this course. Very, very interesting. The people that come out of the woodwork to say, I don't have 2 friends. Those are like, bringing those people out of the woodwork and having a chance to talk to them worth the price of admission in itself. There's not a lot of them. There's many, many more at Cal, I think, than at Stanford. My daughter's got this really interesting job where she's an exam proctor at Cal. And the most common student who needs their exam proctored at Cal is someone who's never gone to class because they're just too uncomfortable in a room full of other people. And they've also got an exam accommodation because it would make them really uncomfortable to take the exam in a room. I don't know how many of those folks we have. I think, I want to reach out to those. If those people are in my class, if somebody wants to say, it makes me really, really uncomfortable to work with 2 other students, and I want to talk to the UAR, or whoever it is you call, to get them the right help, because that's potentially very scary. So the reigning rules are there's 3 reigning rules. You have to work in a group of at least 3. Decisions of the committee are final. And what's the other reigning rule? Oh, there's always a prize category for most spectacular failure. That's a reigning rule. That prize category is there. And you can see what the other categories are. You could guess what y and x were. About a third of student groups guess that for this particular example. I'm going to leave it up as a quiz for us for a little bit. You could have a clever and interesting, completely bogus name for y and x. You could add another x. You know when the data come from. You just need to find a time series that runs from 1892 twice for some reason, up to the present, and add it in. And it turns out, and then you have to offer offering an economic interpretation when you have no idea what the data was. Very liberating exercise. You will be amazed. So this is my most successful contest. I've had many, many, many of these contests. Often a paper in the research literature will tick me off. And this happens 17 times a day in my job. So, one that sophomores could improve as part of a contest. There's a quarter that goes by without one of those. So that's a more common, okay, so now I'm going to shut up. Yes?
Who sits on the committee?
Oh, the committee is me, the head TA, and whoever else is in my office at that time. That's a very good question, though. Sometimes the committee is just me. You know. Yeah, there was somebody else. Yeah.
You said sophomores could improve on a paper.
Yeah.
Do you encourage them to turn that into a poster or something for a conference?
Sometimes if there's so there's several really important outlets. The Stanford Economics Association, which is the undergraduate association, has a journal and has been extremely successful in getting course papers and opinion pieces. So I'll encourage students to send it there. I'll encourage them to take it to the URO, somebody, UAR. UAR has a student presentation festival for early stage research. I'll encourage them to go to that. If it's typically, I will not encourage them to go to an economics conference, because those are they don't have poster sessions or things like that. Although a lot of the times they'll want to do a business paper, and those do have poster sessions, and I'll send them to them. So I'll encourage them to write it, or I'll encourage them to write an honors thesis. You gotta, that's a hard sell to anybody that shows any sign of activity, energy, and everything else. I'll encourage to do all those things. I think that's a really good idea. The disciplines are different. Disciplines are different in that. Mine is not particularly good at bringing rookie researchers into the formal conferences, which tend to be sort of long talk and not poster session-y, but the public policy and business disciplines which are adjacent. Another good question. Michelle.
There's several intriguing things in your talk, Tim, but one of them is that we tend to think real learning is students' ability to transfer knowledge from the more technical or structured framework in which they might have learned it to new situations. And often faculty are frustrated when that doesn't happen, but it sounds like you build it right into the course so that it has to happen and they know it's happening.
So I agree with all of that, except that it has to happen. I thought about that a long time, but I do build it right into the course from problem set one. There are outside the box challenges from problem set one. I think that's very important. I've been driven to sort of my accommodationist half says, look, your plan is to survive these 10 weeks, get the best grade you can, and go on with your life. Fine, okay? I haven't got a good scheme for blocking that. If, however, you're willing to pop out of that mode for just a few minutes, and so like the Storks. The Storks doesn't compel anyone to do translational thinking. It permits the bravest folks in the room to show off that they can do translational thinking. So I think I think realistically we have to permit it. It's pushing on a rope to try to get everybody. You can lead the horse to water, but not get them to think. Is a famous. That's just real. Or no, anyway, I'm channeling. A joke on that. It's just you're pushing on a rope to try to compel active learning. You've got to permit. So I put it in the realm of challenges and fun, because I want people to get excited. Hey, I was up there in the front of the class with one slide and 7 minutes, and I said, look, here's this paper, here's this piece of research I read about in the Wall Street Journal, and I think it's just silly because. That's incredibly empowering, and I want to give them the opportunity to get empowered sort of constantly, and I want to be annoying about it. So it's, it doesn't turn on their pre-committed idea that they should be empowered, but that they sort of, hey, you should be empowered, keeps getting pushed in their face. And there's just opportunities and opportunities, and it can be fun, so it's not threatening, it's not threatening to do this, it's not going to get counted against your grade. It's not threatening, it's an opportunity. So I think of it as an opportunity, but other than that, I agree with you absolutely. I think this is a more difficult challenge for modern students than it was for old students. In building data sets, that's another one. It turns out students have invented sophomores at Stanford have invented some of the most interesting analyses, mostly about student life, that you could ever imagine. I was just shocked by how inventive people would do when I put in these, the contest, which is build your own data set. So like one group, I thought this was just an inspired idea. They asked me and another instructor, another one of the big group instructors, to anonymize our grading data sets for them. And what they did, they hung out in the room where all the big courses in economics return midterms. And they wrote down the order in which students picked up their midterms. They sort of went by that bin, every half hour, and they wrote down which ones had disappeared. And then they asked me to merge that with an anonymized grading data set. And guess what? That order of picking up the data sets predicts high grades to death. Better than the storks. And I think that one's so I thought that was a really interesting project. And I encourage them to participate. What's another one? There's always. This is harder in the days of the IRB. There's always a group of students, always women, that undertakes a large survey to answer the question, why is there no dating at Stanford? And table one always reveals that there's a lot of dating at Stanford. So that's a really, really interesting one. I was sitting, the first time anybody did that one, I was sitting in my office talking to 3 young men who were hoping to study the NFL Combine as a predictor of later wages. So these are 3 very large, very strong young men. And the group of 4 young women comes in with a question about their questionnaire. And one of the young men says, let me guess, Professor, there's 2 hypotheses about why there's no dating at Stanford. You and me, which I thought was just inspired. This guy will go far. But so student life, grading, they can build data sets. They feel really empowered by these things. Do I think these are, do I think the question of like what exactly drives the distinction in grading across our students, I'm not sure that's the most exciting research question, but they can do it. So, I want to, this is a long riff on Michelle's thing. I want to give them a toolkit and encourage them to put it to use on stuff that they think is exciting and where they think they have knowledge, because that's a really, really difficult problem for beginning students, to have enough knowledge on top of all your tools to do a serious empirical study. And it's just amazing what they do. So, it's enabling rather than compelling active learning. Yeah.
How have the student evaluations changed as you've implemented these?
So for me, student evaluations dipped dramatically in the beginning of the century because I was using my old methods, and they came back up radically. There are many, many students who are just annoyed by it, and that's why the accommodationist part is there. You know, and I'll tell them the first day, look, if you think all this is just very annoying and you just want to get through the quarter, that's fine. You know, try not to burn a lot of TA time complaining about it. I'd rather have that time going to teaching, but that, you know, so you got to announce that you're accommodationist, because there's a hardcore group of people. It's there are other ways. So there's course evaluations. The other way where it's been extremely well received is lots of feeders into honors theses. Lots of getting people started. You know, the summer BPUE has been good enough to fund a summer research assistant program. Lots of people who get a taste of research are excited about that. You know, and then you need to give the people that are just. Let me start from another way. The idea that I really want them to think using these tools is one of the least prepossessing ideas they've ever heard. It's completely unpromising idea. You know, this is so alien for many, not for all students, but for a substantial chunk of students. That's just, you know, how can he possibly think that? You know, everyone knows the purpose of university is to distinguish yourself from your peers and get a great job. You know, so who is this goofball who's never had a great job? Who's he to tell me that I should think when I'm here? And there's a hardcore of people you can't budge out of that. So half of my strategy is I give them an exit path if they're willing to take a chance, and the other half is, you know, okay, fine. If that's how you see it, you know, we'll let you do your usual thing. And by the way, your usual thing won't be all that different from there. But there's many, many, many more 21st century people who arrive with that conviction. A little bit fewer now. The beginning of the 21st century was, you know, the parents were also opposed to active learning. Now at least their parents are on their side. But the uncles and the other kids in high school, boy, they're not. Yeah.
Forming work teams. If you let the students form their own work teams, you're probably going to find one or two that are always going to win the most spectacular failure award. At the elementary school level,
Yeah.
teachers forming work teams will pair up a brighter student with some that are, say, struggling.
Yeah.
And do you recommend?
So that's an interesting question. I don't, but my answer turns on the very specific nature of Stanford, which is that the teams form along dorm and freshman dorm lines, rather than by being assortative by success or even degree of commitment to the majors. And you know, and actually one of my department's big problems, the reasons I put energy into the SEA, is that there isn't a social structure, either intellectual or otherwise, associated with the major. I think there are other parts of the university that have been much more successful with that. All the small programs have. And so it just hasn't been an issue. They work with the people that were on their, this is a really, really frightening thing. Often the only people they know in this class of 300 are the 6 that were on their floor of their freshman dorm. This could be their 4th or 5th class in their major, and they haven't met any other, so they don't know. So I think it's a real concern, but I just don't see it. I guess it's a tricky question. I'd like them to be active in it. You know, I'd like them to go out and recruit one another, and I only do it for things that are optional. This is the other thing. I do not have the guts to compel a team project for anything that has a higher reward than you can turn in next week's problem set a day late. Because I think if it gets tied into grading, then you know, you would get the 3 hopeless folks dumped at the bottom. No, the folks that are not in teams are much more the ones who are very socially alienated, who are not very numerous, or at least they, are not willing to come into my office and admit it, rather than the ones that are weak. We have a very low incidence of weak students. I mean, this is Stanford being here. Yeah, we have a very high incidence of students who are not active learners. Michelle.
Another intriguing thing, I think, Tim, that you've been talking about is teaching being a team sport. The teaching part is particularly some of the things you've done within the department, so that a lot of the logistical aspects get handled by the DUS or the department rather than the individual instructor.
Absolutely.
So is that something that kind of came home to you when you were the DUS and had the bigger picture? And
oh, absolutely. That we were, when I put you have to ask me, the DUS, for a regrade rule in place when I was the DUS, and one of my then very young colleagues said, "Oh, let's stop the needless slaughter of grandmothers," which was, and it and I mostly did that when I was DUS. The course rules. What do you have to do to get out? First off, if the rule on how do you skip a midterm is enforced by the DUS rather than the instructor, you can take all that out of the syllabus. Let's get people reading about the economics in the second paragraph rather than reading about the grading rules or the exceptional rules. So let's move that to a common document which everybody shares. But also, I think I think it's just basically wasteful to have. First of all, problems will arise if there's variety in policies across faculty in the same department. The first problem will be that students will foolishly put time into thinking about it. It's dead week, it's exam week. The last thing you want people thinking about is what are the weights in the spreadsheet. And that's just terrible. You want them thinking about content. So first off, by sort of suppressing the behavior, you can move attention to something that's better. But also, I think it liberates the instructor-student pair to talk about content and not to talk about, not to negotiate grades. Negotiating grades is extremely wearing on faculty. It drives them absolutely nuts. And the last thing you want is to have faculty have an office hour experience which is wearing. You want them to have a big smile when the student walks in the door. And that one way to do that is to take out the things which are the most annoying and are pretty rare. They're not, it turned out there weren't a lot of students that wanted to negotiate grades. There weren't a lot of students. There are a lot of students at Stanford, whatever it is, somewhere in the teens are competing in an intercollegiate way. A lot of people do want to miss your midterm because they've got a tournament somewhere, and you got to, better to centralize that, I think, than to leave it to instructors. Yeah.
How much of your time did this sort of paperwork take when you were at DUS?
So I was the first quarter. I had 400 regrade requests from all of the, so they're like 1,500 enrollments. So 400 regrade requests, 1,500 enrollments typically in economics. There were 400 regrade requests. Every quarter after that, I had about 6. So centralization was extremely levered. So perhaps a better answer would be probably less time than the instructors would have spent on it, right? It can be on a net department-wide basis. Having things like, okay, so what exactly are the rules for when you can miss a midterm? Instructors got to look those up or ask somebody. The DUS can just know. So I think there's tremendous economies of scale. Be an economist again. Okay, good. So we're out of time. Anybody figure out what Y and X are? No. If you were students, you would. So Y is the score of the losing team in the big game. And X is the score of the winning team in the big game.